Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel on innovative financing models. My name is Oliver Chase. I'm a partner at the law firm of Hirschen, and Epstein. And today is a very exciting time to be working in the field of supportive housing development because, as many of you know, there's been a real growth in both the aggregate level of financing available for supportive housing projects and also the variety of financing programs. So whereas in days before, a supportive developer would really be looking at HPD supportive housing loan program or HHAC with 9% credits, which are of course great programs, today's developers have a whole different array of tools in the toolbox, from HFA bond financing, HDC bonds, DASNY and OMH bonds, all with 4% credits, MRT capital, and even some of the mixed income programs. So it's a very exciting time, and a time that people can be creative in terms of choosing what financing program to use and how to combine them with a number of other programs. Now, it's also a challenging time because it can be a daunting task to figure out what is the right program for your site, for your population, for the developer, and how to get the programs to work cohesively together. So today we're very fortunate to have a very illustrious panel of for-profit and nonprofit supportive developers, as well as a key agency partner, who are going to talk us through their recent experiences in getting deals closed with some of the cutting-edge financing tools that are out there today. I'll introduce our panelists in the order that they're going to speak. First, we have Martin Dunn, who is the founder and president of Dunn Development Corp, an affordable and supportive housing developer in New York. Next will be Arlo Chase. Arlo is the Vice President of Real Estate at Services for the UnderServed, which is a supportive housing provider and developer. Next will be Robert Sanborn, who is currently principal at Robert Sanborn Development and has been developing housing affordable and supportive in New York since 1990. And last but not least, we will have Marian Zucker, who is president of the Office of Finance and Development at HCR. And so in terms of format, we're going to have 4 presentations, one from each of the panelists, followed by a short panel discussion among the panelists and myself. And then at the end, we'll open up for questions from the floor. So if people have questions that arise about a particular presentation, please write it down, hold it to the end, and we'll definitely get to it. So Martin is going to be talking about his recently closed mixed income, mixed population project in the Bronx.
Great. Thank you, Oliver. So one of the things that we often hear from communities about our affordable and supportive housing projects is that for the community units, the rents and incomes are too high. And the other thing that we always hear is that the rent and incomes are too low. And they're right about both at the same time. When the community units are serving one AMI level, whether it's 60% AMI or 50% AMI, we end up serving a very, very narrow range of households, and most people in need of the affordable housing are not eligible. As everyone knows, a very significant number of households make too little to afford that, but it's the same thing that there's a very significant number of households in need of affordable housing that make too much. And for some neighborhoods in particular, like the Southern Bronx, where there's been so much housing developed for one narrow income band, 57 to 60% of AMI, there's some projects that are actually having challenges renting up their community units, or they're finding that they're just taking people from their other projects as people are trading up for brand new buildings. In particular, the units above tax credit levels, so few units have been developed at the levels above 60%, it's 70% AMI, 80%, 90%, even 100%, that there's extremely strong demand. We see as strong a demand for those units as we do for the extremely low, like the below 40%, below 50, below 30 even. And if you're a household making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, the market's not serving you in New York City. And so if the government programs aren't serving you and the market isn't serving you, there's a big crisis. And at the same time, and because of that situation, we hear a lot of pressure from elected officials, community boards, and others about concentration of poverty in neighborhoods, about concentration of poverty in our projects. And they're looking for more economically integrated and mixed projects. So to address this issue, housing advocates, affordable housing developers, government agencies like HPD, HCR, HDC, and some elected officials have long advocated for the federal tax credit program to do income averaging. The idea, instead of having all the units below 60% of area median income, that you would average at 60. So 40%, 60%, 80% AMI is an averaging, or 30% AMI, 60% AMI, 90% AMI. But as waiting around for Congress is about as fruitless as trying to negotiate an HPD regulatory agreement, couldn't help myself. So to start to address this in the meantime, HCR implemented a pilot project called the Mixed Income Low-Income Housing Credit Pilot, so within their 9% tax credit program. And it was based on an innovative idea that most 9% tax credit projects have a significant amount of excess eligible basis. And so you can do income averaging within those projects without any change in federal legislation. And so we closed the first project under that pilot at the end of April. And so I'm going to go into some more of the details about how the pilot worked in our project. So first about our project. So called Marcy Sheridan Apartments. It's on the corner of Marcy Place and Sheridan Avenue in the Bronx, 1 block off the Grand Concourse. Less than 0.2 of a mile from the B&D train stop, so very good transit access. 74 units, new construction on private land. It was funded with tax credits from HCR, as I mentioned. So Hudson Housing Capital was a syndicator. Capital One was the investor. The bank construction loan from JP Morgan Chase that originated the permanent loan for the New York City pension funds, NYCers with Sony Mae Insurance. This was also a supportive housing project. So 37 of the units were supportive housing, studio apartments for people with HIV/AIDS, with funding through HASA. Services for the underserved is the master tenant and service provider for those units. Oliver was the attorney. Marian was the funder. Almost everyone was in the deal. And then the 37 non-special needs units were family units, mostly 2 and 3 bedroom units. And so for those non-special needs units, 42% of them we raised above 60% of area median income, and 42% of them we lowered a corresponding amount. So we only had 16% of the non-supportive units, or 8% of the units in the project were at 60% of area median income. And that's what HCR allowed in the pilot. The idea is you could raise units above as long as you averaged at 60 and raised a corresponding amount of units down as long as the average was below 60. And what they did was they waived the per unit tax credit cap per tax credit unit cap and applied their cap to all the units in the project as long as you had the excess basis available. Because of the caps that government agencies have, either per unit caps, per project caps, or eligible basis caps, most projects have excess basis. And projects that are more expensive, so Davis-Bacon projects, often have very significant excess basis. And so as an example, on Marcy Sheridan, the amount of capital costs that were basis eligible would have made us eligible for a little over $2 million in 9% tax credits. And HCR has a cap per project of $1.43 million, which meant we had about 31% more basis than we needed. So the idea is if you're only using, if the amount of credits you're going to get is 70% of the ones you could be eligible for, you could make 30% of those units above tax credit levels, generate more rents, lower other units, and not lose any of your federal tax credits. So in our case, we made about 27% of the project on square footage, the applicable fraction, was above tax credit levels. And we're closing another one under this pilot in July, where it's about 23% of the units are above tax credit levels. In New York City, at least, we're effectively capped. We look to do this. The most we're going to do in any case, even if there was a lot more excess basis, would be 30%, because for the 420C real estate tax exemption, you're limited. You have to have 70% of the units under a tax credit regulatory agreement. So 30% is effectively the most we can do anyways. So what HCR allowed in the pilot was for you to set those rents above tax credit levels at either 70% of median, 80% of median, 90%, 100, 110, or 120. And they did have unit distribution requirements. This was not eligible for projects with all studio apartments. There's a couple different options. We chose the one that was 40%, 2 bedrooms or larger to be eligible. And they gave a bigger marketing band if you were in a qualified census tract. So you had a 15% marketing band if you were in a qualified census tract to help you attract those higher income tenants to what's a lower income neighborhood, which with the goal of bringing in economic diversity, which was actually we thought was a very smart idea. HPD and HDC on projects above tax credit levels allow very big marketing bands. So I don't know how many people have done the mixed income projects with the city, but if you're doing a low-income unit below 60, they'll set the rents at 57% of area median. You have a very small band. But if you do a unit at 80% of area median, you can serve people up to 100. And if you do a rent at 100%, you can serve people up to 130. And a rent at 130, you can serve people up to 165%. Well, the idea is you need a bigger marketing band to serve people who have more options. Well, the state's response to that was, why are we giving a greater subsidy for middle-income people than we are for low-income people? But they gave a carve-out for attracting people to poor census tracts where they want the income diversity. We thought it was a perfect balance. If we're doing a project in a hot neighborhood in Brooklyn, we don't need any marketing band. But for this part of the Bronx, we thought it was a good middle ground. So we did, ours were, so we could go up to 85% of median income on the incomes, and our rents were at 70%. So that gave us a marketing band on our family units in this project. The marketing band, or the affordability band, was from about $26,000 to about $83,000. Now, one of the big, I think, advantages for doing this, the government's often given incentives for you to serve people at lower AMIs, and HCR has that in their scoring. So to do units at 30, 40, 50% of median income, and the city in their new term sheets is requiring it in some programs. One of the big problems with those is when the average rents are that low, the projects trend negative, and your debt service coverage ratios and your income expense ratios trend negative. The beautiful thing about this, if you're averaging at 60, you can serve people at very low incomes and offset it by higher rents, and you have much more financially stable projects because of the stabilizing impact of the stabilizing impact of debt. And I have a slide if people want to ask about this to show the negative trending issue. So it also helps with community acceptance, having this mixed income. So the other part of the pilot, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go quickly now, was to try to address some of the obstacles of doing mixed income housing within tax credits. So this is our 6th project that had a chunk of units, 20 to 30% above 60% of median. But there's 2 big disadvantages. One is the next available unit rule, which has financial consequences and is a compliance nightmare, big disincentive to have the next available unit rule, and I can explain that if we get to questions. And the other one is that you don't get recertification waivers. So every tenant has to get recertified every year. You don't get the waiver that you get on recertifications if you're a 100% project. And so as part of this, the solution was to do a bifurcated condominium structure like 80/20s are now doing. So we created 2 condominium units, and which effectively creates two buildings in the eyes of the federal tax credits. So the affordable units, and they're all mixed within the building, the affordable units are one building with 100% applicable fraction, and the units that were above were another building. Even though they're all mixed across floors, it gets us around the next available unit rule and makes us eligible for 100% recert waivers. So we worked out with HCR as part of the pilot, all the regulatory agreement language, binding agreement, commitment letter, how they would do the change in applicable fraction. We worked it out with their asset management and compliance people. We confirmed with HPD that it worked within the 420C program. And so now that we've done all the hard work, we hope that this will become a regular thing that's available to everyone. In the first pilot round, you had to show that you had experience with mixed income projects. Our hope is that it becomes a standard option for HCR. And I would even think that particularly in qualified census tracts, I would actually even advocate it becoming a requirement to help address the criticisms of the concentration of poverty issues. And we're also really hoping that HPD, I know HPD is considering this, and we really hope that they do it as well.
Thank you, Martin. That's an exciting transaction. You must have had a great lawyer.
Expensive, but good.
So, Martin, when you were structuring this deal, did you have any concerns, or did any of your finance parties have any concerns about lease-up risk on the moderate income units, given the significant supportive component?
People definitely asked about it, and it is something that we had to think about, and it's something that we talked about. And I'll tell you my perspective on it is, if we can't attract people at those income levels to our integrated supportive housing projects, we have a big problem with the model. Our model is not a good model if the only people that will live in those community units are poor people because they have no other option. So I think it forces us to be on our A game. It forces them to be on their A game. It has to be a building that people that are paying closer to market rate would want to live in. And I think there's some things that help with it being supportive housing, the front desk, the amenity of the front desk, and the fact that we'll have other amenity spaces, a computer room, library, and exercise room that we don't have in our regular affordable housing. We think it'll help that, but I like the accountability that it has to be good enough for people paying those higher incomes. We're working on a project in Queens where we're going to have 40% of the non-supportive units at going up to 100%. And this is a project where the neighborhood blocked previous attempts to develop this project. And we've gone in and said, look, people are, I think, going to be making up to $120,000 in Queens. And we're saying, these people, the supportive tenants, aren't going to be a problem in your neighborhood. If they were, they'd first be a problem in the building. I'm not going to be able to rent the units to people making $130,000, paying a rent over $2,000 a month. If this is not a functional project for everyone in the building, in the neighborhood, and it does force us to do a high quality model. But I'm happy because I got to say, again, as I started, if it wasn't that high quality, for people that make more money to live in, we shouldn't be doing it. That's my opinion.
I have a question. Martin, when you looked at the trends going negative, did you take in consideration putting any subsidies such as VASH or DOHMH or any of the programs out there to help mitigate that on the supportive units?
The supportive units are underwritten at below. Anything that's not project-based, that's above the tax credit level, we're not going to underwrite debt on. And so there is a HASA subsidy that was sufficient. But for us, it's all about sizing the debt. The idea with the negative trending is debt's fixed for 30 years. So when tax credit investors and lenders look at income going up at 2% and expenses going up at 3%, your project will go negative immediately if you had no debt, or very quickly. So the greater the debt, which increases at 0%, the more stable the project. And people may not realize what it does, how much investors look at that, what the debt coverage ratio is at year 15. You may not realize it, but they do. and it affects investor pricing, number one, and number two, it affects investor appetite, whether people are interested in your deal, and for syndicators, it affects who they can go and market that deal to. So the long-term structural stability of these projects, I think is very important, and it's one of the big obstacles to serving people at 30 and 40% AMI, is it makes your projects financially unstable unless you can offset it at higher levels, which is the beauty of this HCR pilot. HCR gets a lot of credit for doing this.
So the supportive units you underwrote at 60?
They're somewhere between, we underwrote them to what SUS could pay and still have the level of services they wanted. So it wasn't at 60. I think the rents were about 725, 675?
Yeah, 725.
725, so somewhere between 50 and 60, low 50s. But that wasn't actually part of the income averaging. The units we lowered, because the units that were higher were all the community units. So we ended up averaging, below 60 because we wanted to do all the averaging outside the supportive.
And Arlo, in terms of you're deciding what tenants to put into this development, will SUS give particular thought to the sort of the mixed income nature of the building, or the sort of relative to your?
Yeah, I mean, I first want to say that I'm not the one choosing the tenants, or we have a large intake group and social service department that deals with that more granularly. But I would say, look, any permanent housing, we are going to be very careful with what residents we put in, whether it's a mixed income or a low income. I don't think there's going to be a difference in terms of, because there's people at 80% AMI. I mean, we strive, obviously it's a delicate balance that all the supportive housing providers know, which is taking people right from the shelters who obviously often have traumatic backgrounds, and ensuring that they're able to live independently with the supports that we provide at the building. Sufficient, and it's not only, that they can live independently for the other tenants, the non-supportive tenants, but for the other supportive tenants, because people who are dealing drugs or really not able to cope in permanent housing or need more intensive medical care are just not the right candidates, and drag down the other tenants, whether they be supportive or not, in a building.
And one of the things we've found is that the presence of families, regardless of the income level, the presence for the community units being all family units with kids, it has a stabilized impact on the building in general. I think, supportive housing residents living next to a family modify their behavior out of respect for the community they live in, more so than they might if they were living next to just singles.
Last thing that strikes me about this, Martin, is interesting to hear that the master lease of the supportive is actually is providing the front desk service for the entire building.
Yes, that's been the traditional model, the kind of what's been offered to communities to take the concentration of supportive housing is there's going to be front desk. There's no regular affordable housing, even at we have affordable housing projects that are at 100% of median income, don't have front desk. And so it's really, the front desk is only there because it's part of the service program. Now, the way for us it's important that it be not someone in a guard uniform and it not come across as security, even if it is. And so SUS is going to do it with their own staff, and it's more expensive than if they use a security service. So we actually lowered the rent from what it otherwise would have been for them to be able to pay a higher rate for that front desk staff, because we do want the families to, for them, they think it's the families think it's an amenity for the building, and that's part of what we think makes it work. Because here the rents are below market, but they're not that much below market. So we have to people do have to want to live here.
Martin, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying with regard to tenants and the mix and how that all works out, but I do think that for many of the providers here, the community that's being formed within the supportive programs, particularly if the programs are 50 or plus % of the total units, I believe that that community in itself creates harmony within a building, and individuals that, may require additional services have that support there immediately. So I don't necessarily agree with your premise that by having, necessarily the higher income residents, the stability and support of a community is lacking, for the other type of model. But, I'm sure that we'll see as these things start to roll out, what is working, what isn't working.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Martin. So our next presenter will be Arlo. He's going to be talking about a recently closed HDC bond deal with a supportive housing joint venture. And he's also going to be talking about a pipeline development using HFA bonds.
Right, thanks everyone. So I didn't put any slides about SUS, but just for those who don't know, we were started in 1979 as a result of the deinstitutionalization of developmental disability places like Willowbrook, and have evolved into a more comprehensive service agency for people with mental illness, other behavioral health issues, homelessness, as well as developmental disability. We recently merged with Palladia, you may have heard, and back in December, and combined we have an organization with an annual budget of $180 million and 1,800 employees in the 5 boroughs, with a concentration in Harlem, the Bronx, and Brooklyn. So I'm going to briefly touch on this project because this has not received HFA board approval yet, though I'm hopeful that it's in the board schedule for July. But and this is taboo for Shinny and Marian, but just wanted to mention. So this is a project we're co-developing with Bronx Pro, and excited. We've worked on a couple projects with them. It's on Morris Avenue between 182nd and 183rd Street in the Bronx, Community Board 5. And we were 50-50 partners on the whole project. What is really noticeable for us, new for us about this project is, I'm seeing this, but you're not.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
do you know?
Got the wrong one up. That's mine.
So, while we try and figure this out, the exciting thing for this transaction for us is that it's our first, and building along Martin's presentation, it's our first project that we're developing that has units above 60% AMI. And this has units targeted at 80% area median income, as well as 30% are homeless, formerly homeless with subsidy from the Office of Mental Health. 20% of the units are for families and individuals at 80% AMI, and the remainder being at 60% AMI. So this is a very exciting project for us in that regard. In particular, it was very helpful in getting Community Board 5 to support the project. As I'm sure many of you here, oh, there we go. Thank you, Robin. So there's the unit, a little basic facts about the building and the project. As I was giving you the breakdown, the Community Board 5 was especially receptive to hearing that there are units above the 60% AMI, and Martin was talking about the criticism that a lot of our both individual projects and government programs face in these areas is that everything's below 60 or below 50. So having the 80% AMI units was a huge bonus for securing Community Board 5 approval for the project. What it does do also, though, is make the financing a little bit, there's a rendering of the building as well as the vacant lot that it currently is. It makes the financing a little bit harder for us because the 80% AMI units, even though you can charge slightly higher rents, do not make up for the lack of equity. This is a 4%, proposed 4% bond transaction, so we don't have the income averaging possibility from the HCR program that Martin was just talking about. So we do have, we're able to finance this project, hopefully, fingers crossed, with board approval, with sort of a robust number of sources, including, of course, the bond first loan. And this is in addition to MRT subsidy distributed by HFA, HPD financing through their new construction ELA program, as well as OMH capital, which pursuant to the RFP that OMH put out, I guess it was about 18 months now ago, and SUS was awarded. That will be our capital stack, and in addition to the HFA, newly created HFA middle income program, which perhaps Marian will talk more about. But so we do have a number of sources on the capital stack, which makes it a little bit of a more complex project, not certainly unusual for all of us in the affordable housing field. But that's all I'll say about this project, so I don't jinx it at the board meeting or anything. This project has already closed and is in construction, so I could risk jinxing the construction aspect, but not the financing. This is the Henry Apartments in Brownsville or Ocean Hill, Brooklyn, that we're co-developing with Alembic Community Development, and I see Mike McCarthy and Karna Garrick Sestero here from Alembic. So I have a lot of slides on this project, and I will have about 5 more minutes, so I'll run through it relatively quickly. These are 2 buildings across the street from each other on the Broadway, on the corner of Broadway and Decatur Streets. So it's right underneath the J train, the elevated J train there that goes out through Williamsburg and Hipsterville out to Brownsville and then out to the airport. So this was a notable project for us in that, first of all, it was our first joint development. It's our largest project to date, and it's our first project involving families, which is really exciting for us. The supportive housing component, and I'll get to the financing, the supportive housing component here is all singles, but the community units are a large mix of 2 and 3 bedrooms and some studios. So that family component was, again, talking about community board approval, an essential piece of securing community board 16 in Brooklyn approval for this project. So here's sort of some SUS sites in the area. This is the Henry Apartments down here on Broadway, and these are other SUS buildings. DD refers to developmental disability. Those are generally smaller facilities. We have 2 permanent tax credit projects right here, also in Community Board 16 on Truxton Road and Mother Gaston Place, which were 9%, a little bit smaller deals, 9% tax credit deals that are now up and running. Here's an aerial shot. So the site to the right, the vacant lot, is a city-owned, or was a city-owned lot. And the other site across the street was owned by a part of the consulting team for the deal, a local businessman named Stan Henry, who had operated a hardware store for a long time and was ready to close. I'm going to skip this. This is a little bit, it's the sort of, all the things you think in new supportive housing would have a good amount of supportive service space, office space for our case managers and program director. We'll have a nice size landscaped outside recreation area. We have a burgeoning urban farms program at SUS that we're very proud of. So here's a little bit of the target breakdown. So it's the HPD, standard HPD model of 60% formerly homeless special needs units and 40% community units. So you see the income of the community units. There are 5 3 bedrooms, and we added those especially at the urgent request of the community board, 25 two-bedrooms and 25 one-bedrooms. There's the development team. One other nice thing about this project is this used project-based Section 8, not allocated as usual through HPD, but via NYCHA. And I think it was a promise that the then NYCHA had made at a Shinny conference a couple years ago to, it was either Ruth Ann or Matt at that time, to dedicate some of their project-based Section 8 that we were able to take advantage of. So also an expensive project. This had HDC as the bond issuer and second mortgage with a co-second from HPD. And then really what made the project work other than those sources was the significant number of project-based Section 8. But that, of course, drives up your construction numbers because it is a prevailing wage project because of the project-based Section 8, as well as the HPD subsidy source, which is home funds. I'm about out of time here. Obviously, there's a lot of details we could get into about all the budgets. But, the other nice thing about this project, even though it's controlled by Alembic and Stan Henry, is the commercial space. In addition to the social service space for our staff and our clients and the residents, there is about 7,000 feet among the two buildings of dedicated toward commercial, ground floor commercial retail. And this was also an important part for the community board. This is on Broadway, which is a retail strip, and the fact that it had sat vacant for a long time was definitely seen as burdensome for local business owners. There's a commercial condos that are being created to control the retail space. And that's it.
Thank you, Arlo. So I'm intrigued by the, and I don't want to take away any thunder from Marian's presentation, but the middle income subsidy from HFA. We got to hear more about this, Marian.
I'll be happy to discuss it.
Now?
Well, let's jump right into that. It's
Just briefly, a little teaser maybe. Yeah.
actually the RFP is out on the street already. We got in this year's state budget $25 million for subsidy dollars for income up to 130% of AMI. $25 million doesn't go that far. Really? All right. Rachel told me that. Never hear me at those things. Okay. I'm going to have to move my seat. We put out can you hear me now? No.
Doesn't seem like
Yes?
your mic is working.
Eat the mic.
There you go.
Eat the mic. All right.
Be the mic.
HFA has an RFP on the street right now for $25 million of subsidy dollars that can be used for incomes up to 130% of AMI. We're not expecting that $25 million is going to be our only shot at the apple. We're really hoping that what we can prove with this $25 million is that we can create some pretty exciting projects around the state. If it included supportive housing, more the better. But we're really looking for wow projects that we can then show to the world, oh, if only we had this resource in a greater amount, look at what we can do on a statewide basis. So we're particularly interested in things that have huge neighborhood impacts. If you're near a train station, if you're going to do something that's really going to move the dial in a particular community, we're very, very interested in talking to you about those projects. We're expecting this first round of projects will be financed through HFA using bonds. It's possible, but we haven't decided yet whether we're going to put it in the unified funding round. So if you're working on something, because we know how long it usually takes to get a project, especially a transformational project, off the ground. If you're working on something that you think might fit for us, please call me, or Brett Garwood is here today. If you don't know him, he's not in the audience. We're going to give him a shout out without him being here. So I'm going to have Roger stand up. And Roger Harry runs multifamily finance, the bond side for us at HFA. Stop by and see him. Set up a meeting, come in and talk to us about it. We're really, really excited about the money and the opportunity. Does that answer your
Thank you.
question?
Yes, that's a good start. Yes. Arlo, going back to a second for your the Morris Avenue site, have you done the math in terms of what it looks like 14 units at 80? What does it cost you on out of equity?
Oh, I need Justin Stein to tell me that answer. Is Justin here from Bronx Pro? Oh, right.
I think generally at current interest rates, it's about 85.
I knew Martin could answer.
It's about 85. It's about 85,000 a unit to take a unit from 60% to 80% if you lose the credits. It's expensive.
It's expensive. We're really excited about what it might mean for communities in the long run. So we're not just constraining the housing for folks at 60% of median income. I mean, we're really allowing for much more vibrant communities if we do it. I think it's worth the investment.
I agree. Actually, early on when SLIC first came out, the state had a requirement that I think 60% of the SLIC-funded units had to be above 60% of median. So the first 3 or 4 times we did this, we did that with SLIC, and you had to make it the 80% AMI units, or 90. Actually, they allowed 90. When things changed, when the market crashed and equity prices went down, they allowed SLIC to become a gap filler, and we really lost the opportunity to do this. And so I'm very excited that these options are back now. But I have a question, Arlo. So on the Brooklyn project, 2 buildings, were the supportive, were mixed across them, and does that mean I know you had service space in each, did that mean you had to do front desk in each?
That's correct, yes, yeah.
And you were, for the 40%, you were allowed to do it based on units, not square footage, the 40% community, was there pushback on that? The 60-40 split, being able to?
Well, the 40% are actually much more the square footage.
Right, probably closer to 50-50?
Right.
Was there pushback on that?
You mean from HPD?
Yeah.
No, we did not. Mike, I'm looking at Mike McCarthy, no, we didn't have pushback.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Arlo. Our next presenter will be Robert, talking about his recent transaction on Creston Avenue, which was a HFA MRT.
There's a party out there.
First, let me try to figure out how to make this work. Where'd you put the file?
It's right here.
We're showing our age and
Robin to bound on to the stage in a single leap.
She did, 1 leap.
I know.
That was it.
It was impressive.
It's one of my many superpowers.
Marian and I knew better than to bring PowerPoints.
Yeah. No, I feel good about that.
Where is mine? Move it along. Good afternoon. Hi, Robert Sanborn. I want to talk a little bit about what it was like to put together the first MRT supportive project in New York City. And there are 2 backstories to this, really. One is the backstory that we had, the people in the team, and the other was the people in the policy. The people in the policy should not be at all forgotten and continue to play a significant role in why we have this huge resource. And in addition to the recent experimentation that HFA has put out with regard to allowing incomes to float to a higher rate, this particular effort was untested, uncharted, and unknown to virtually everyone. When I first heard about this was in 2011. I think it was a Shinny event, and I went to one of their workshops. And in that workshop, so we got this big announcement. The state and DOH is allowing now part of the savings from Medicaid savings to go to capital costs. And I said, this is not true. This cannot be true. So as the policy evolved, Shinny, CSH, DOH, and the providers have been, hammered out a way by which some of the money savings could be diverted. This was a major victory, and it was a seismic change, as far as I can see, in the community of supportive housing. This would allow not only a gap filler, but it attracts the types of funding that you need to fill and to provide the high quality supportive housing that we all come to see develop these days. What followed from that was OTDA with HHAP, Federal Home Loan Bank, and of course HFA led the way, and I really, under Marian's leadership, Gail Bressler, who's no longer with HFA, retired, Roger took over her job, and I understand how big those shoes were to fill. Really, we're behind this effort to try to get the first project off the ground. So let's not lose track of that. That's really critical to this story and why this resource is available. The second is the team, of course. Volunteers America was the project sponsor, co-developer, along with myself. The architect from Fernando Villa from MAP, a brilliant design. The funders on this project, besides HFA, HHAP, including Redstone Equity, held their number for a year while we worked out the acquisition of the site. And so all the pieces gelled in a manner that was unusual. The other unusual part was that we went from concept, basically schematic drawings, to closing in 8 months. And that included getting all the funding in tandem as we were putting the project together. So the results are here. Let's see if I have this right. Is this the button? Yeah. Or just do this. Okay, sorry.
Do the arrow down and no.
No? Do the arrow? Yeah. Sorry. Here we go. Here we go. All right. So this is street view of the building. It's a mid-block building, 9,500 square feet. If we had tripped over 10,000 square feet in the R8 zone, there would have been different consequences with regard to setbacks and so forth. So we had a 30-foot setback, built a 10-story, 63,000 square foot building on 6,000 square feet of land. In addition to that, what we are able to take advantage of, because we have supportive units, and I'm sure people know this, is that the supportive units count as community facility space, which in DOB parlance means that you can deduct from your FAR those units that are part of the supportive program. So we actually got a much larger building to the extent of 10 to 15,000 square feet. More FAR in the building. We have setbacks on the 9th floor. The building also has solar panels, and it's about to be certified platinum LEED. Let's see. Another view, front view of the building. We'd use different cladding, so forth, on this particular building. Brick as well as metal panels. We also had sunshades. A lot of people have big arguments over sunshades, but in fact it does have an element of cooling the building and keeping it warm during the summer. During the winter, pardon me. So the interior unit, this is part of a 2-bedroom unit. Lots of light, lots of window space. Our rear yard, this is not fully bloomed. I just was there the other day. You'll see towards the end we have something called water hogs. So part of the DEP guidelines as of 2012, you have to retain a certain amount of water on site during storms, and in particular we have a series of this which go into tanks underneath the paving, and then it's released slowly into the water and sewer system. The pro forma. So you could look at MRT simply as, oh, is another gap piece, but the story in and the impact it has on residents and the savings to taxpayers of New York is quite substantial. If you look at the DOH-MH study that came out a few years ago, so I think it's still on Shinny's website, where the savings of supportive housing is in the range of $10,000 a unit. The repayment of the MRT financing that we have here is in about 5 to 6 years. Regulatory agreements are 30 years plus, so the taxpayer really works, has a tremendous savings in these buildings. We've been 100% full. We were 90% full in less than 30 days. I do think, in retrospect, that some of what we could have probably done was expand the income band just a little bit and try to get some 80% units in. However, we found during the rent up, it was the units, the 50% or below, that were renting up. And that we had to, and then between 50 and 60, there were issues there, even when we had the 57% as the lower band on the 60% AMIs. The other thing is, let me see if my highlight works. Okay, so standard equity and deferred fee on the project, we were able to get in excess of 50% equity into the project, which is really great. And I also want to highlight the use of the solar credits. Well, we have solar, just the arithmetic on solar credits is that we got 30% on the capital of the installation of the panels, which was about $300,000. Plus we added $100,000 in NYSERDA grant net of consultant fee. So we had about $110,000 to have a 38 kilowatt system in the building that we had to distribute throughout either the bonds or other capital resources, which is really, when you talk about it and you talk about the savings, and most importantly in supportive housing developments where we have an excess of 20% common area space, you're talking all the hallways, the elevator, the stairwells, the community room, the lobby, the offices for supportive housing, all picked up by the solar panel to the tune of 91%. These are our MRT numbers. These days I would be asking for 2 or 3 times more. And also I'm trying to figure out, as Marian was speaking, how to use the 25 million. So that was great. That was great news. HHAP, again, it's very critical you understand the sequences. We have the policy. We had to put policy in place. We had HFA. We had Gail Bressler and her team all ready to take advantage of this. The RFP came out in June 2012. We were in the ground in December 2012. And OTDA was very critical in this and filling the gap, and they jumped in on this as the train was moving, meaning that HFA, OTDA, and then Federal Home Loan Bank came in October. Even with that, we were still able to close in December. So there are a couple of things that I wanted to highlight was that we have OMH Pop A and we have DOH MH Pop A and VASH. The VASH is project-based through NYCHA, capped at 8 units. We don't have to trigger prevailing wages. Our cash flow doesn't trend negative. Thankful for that. We are able to then average within the 60%, which is sort of a little different than the averaging that we're talking about, because of the VASH certificates, which were $1,300 for 1 bedroom, $1,550 for 2 bedrooms. We were able to lower the rents a bit to capture and fill out the building. As we all like to have a little party at the end, the ribbon cutting came along, a lot of smiling faces. And I wanted to leave, this is all about innovation. A remarkable, and I field calls maybe 2 or 3 times a month on MRT and so forth from folks in different states. The key, and I tell everyone, is that you have to have your advocacy groups lined up to work with the policymakers who then have the support of the governor. And despite the hits that governor taking these days, he did the right thing here and hopefully will continue. And the agencies followed suit. But the other part of the innovation is this, and this was serendipitous to the project. We discovered an outfit that provides transit information, bilingual transit information. We put it under our energy savings screen, which for the geeks like myself, that's the screen that I keep looking at. to see is this actually working. And then the tenants all come around on the transit screen. We should all be putting transit screens in our buildings. It is a fabulous resource. It is the most popular attribute of the building for the tenants, other than their beautiful units. And the MTA is a little behind because the alpha lines are not on here yet, but they will be in 2 months, so we're going to update this. And I believe it's the first screen in affordable housing in the city as well. So with that said, I think the takeaways on this is, you know, people make a difference, whether you're on the development side, whether you're on the policy side. This was a huge win for supportive housing, continues to be, and it's now informed as we open up with all these other types of potential ways that we can attract funding. We hope to have more of this in the future, and thank you very much for your time.
That's great. Why don't you stay there?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was trying to escape the questions. Pardon me.
Thank you.
Since I already drilled a couple people, so yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Robert. That was great. So I'm curious, as the first MRT project to close, did you have sort of interagency issues with any of the funders? Was there any hiccups on the way to closing in terms of, regulatory, sort of getting regulatory agreements to mesh? And
Are you kidding? No way. First of all, we have our bonds backed by Sony Mae, thankfully. And of course, Sony Mae's over there. So once we got the, and the equity folks, they were nervous, but they kept rolling along with us. But lead agency as HFA was solid. We did finally iron out a lot of the regulatory issues, obviously on the subsidy issues. They want to make sure the guarantees are there. Volunteers America personally guarantee them. OMH wrote all types of letters. OTADA worked with us. They worked with us, and we were able to get through all this, and I do appreciate everything they did. Brett was critical, and thank goodness till this day he's still pushing hard on all fronts there. But yes, short answer is yes, there were issues that we had to overcome, and it largely had to do with the old issue, which I don't understand why it's still an issue of whether the subsidies will ever go away. And that seems to be where everyone got stuck on. But the overall, and then because this predated the development of what the standards are, VOA actually invented its own tracking system, which I'm sure will merge onto the new tracking system as to how savings can be tracked for those units. So we're pretty much, we're all there. And those units, of course, filled up very, very, very quickly. That's it.
I had a similar question about you raised that people are concerned about if the subsidies go away.
Right.
Because when we've done it, there's always some kind of there's some kind of relief valve. If the subsidies go away, you can rent them as tax credit units. I'm guessing that's not available for the MRT because you had a dedicated capital source. So how did the equity investor get comfortable with that?
Well, I certainly did not bring up the point that we could not, what are we going to do with the MRT units? So we punted. And I think everybody realized that they want to get the project in the ground. So it was not addressed, Martin. And I'm glad it wasn't addressed because it was trying to squeeze this into, a 6-month startup scenario, construction startup scenario was hard enough. But I think the idea was that the balance sheet of VOA was able to convince both Sonny Mae and the equity investor not to worry about, whether or not there will be an additional population, whether it was a different population within the scheme of 8 or H or whatever. But at that point, that was not the question. The question is, who backs up the subsidy if it goes away?
And when you were talking about marketing, you said it was easy to market the 50%, but that's 60%?
Below, 50% below. Right.
And there's saturation issues in the Bronx at the 60%?
Well, let's put this in context here. You're talking about a census tract where the AMI was 20,000 and change. I'm looking at census tracts now with 19,000 and change. If you look at it as a simple number, you will not understand what's the dynamic that's going on around it. And everybody that has mentioned the expanding of the market band to 80% and so forth is absolutely correct. And you can see it and you can feel it, and that's happening. However, the population that applied, the folks that applied to the building, all lived in the Bronx, all wanted better housing or were looking for housing, did not come from Westchester, did not come from Yonkers or Mount Vernon or anywhere else like that. And they're trying to find a better situation to be in a more affordable situation. We cut it off artificially simply after, we ended up over 1,000 applicants, and that was, we had 600 right away, 700 right away, and trying to glean out, who those tenants would be and, income qualifications and so forth. But the issue was the poverty levels were stunningly difficult. And every time you were involved in this, and if you see and you read about it in the paper, it's sort of, you're like, it's not, you don't feel it, but we felt it and we saw it. And now the question is, how do we balance it out? Because you can't walk away from this issue. You cannot walk away from the fact that there's the bifurcation of the incomes, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. How are you going to handle that in the future?
Thank you, Robert.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Last but not least, Marian is going to give us the beyond the 5 boroughs perspective on what's new in supportive housing, and she's also going to talk a little bit about the rollout of MRT on 9% transactions.
All right then.
Right?
All right. Looks like that emptied the room. So I think this is my 3rd or 4th time talking about MRT at a Shinny conference. And I remember the first time we talked about it, the room was packed. And everybody's main question was, how are we going to prove the savings? That was, everybody was like crazed about that being a hurdle that they weren't going to get past. And I can see by the fact that there are empty seats here today that people are past that as a hurdle in terms of using MRT. So I want to echo something that Robert said. I really think that it's easy to lose track of the fact that when DOH first made this money available to HCR for capital purposes, that it came from a governor's initiative, and that the governor has really done some very incredible things around housing in his first term and now into his second term, and we continue to have this opportunity to have expanded resources that we can devote to a range of housing needs around the state. So kudos to the governor, and we're here to help implement that. And as you heard from Martin, what we're always looking forward to is different ways to skin the cat, different ways to put a project together that meets particular needs in a community. So just because it's not on our website or you haven't seen us do something in a particular way in the past, please don't let that stop you. I mean, if it's crazy, don't bother, but if you think it's not too crazy, we're ready to lean in and talk it through with you and try to figure out how to make that work, whether it's in our 9% program or in our 4% bond programs. So I am going to talk a bit about where what we're doing now with MRT, but I want to just give you a little bit of history of what we've done so far, and I think we have time to do that. So far, we have closed on 8 MRT transactions. I think for me, lessons learned about MRT is that the Preston Avenue deal did come together pretty quickly. The other deals have had a very long gestation time period before they're ready to get to the closing table for us. And I think that's because, as you saw from the budgets that everybody showed you here today, is that there's so many sources of money that need to come together to make these transactions work, and that takes time. And I think the other thing that we've seen is some supportive housing developers able to move forward on their own with development projects, and we've seen some marriages, short-term marriages and long-term marriages come together of supportive housing providers and developers. I happen to think that's maybe not a bad thing, because what I'm hoping is that as we put more and more of this money on the table, it will encourage for-profit developers to say, hey, down that marriage out in the community, I can get more points in the 9% round, or I can get more capital to do a bond deal, and we'll end up with more integrated housing options around the state. So of the 8 projects that we've closed so far, all of them, as I said, have been bond issues. 6 of the 8 have been in New York City. If you recall, we really started out using the MRT to help meet the state's commitment to New York 3. And then last year, as we saw that we were really starting to work our way through those numbers, we made the funds available on a statewide basis. The first 2 projects we closed, one was in Suffolk County with Ralph, who was here this morning, but I think he's left. For the day, Ralph Fasano, Concern for Independent Living, an integrated housing project in Suffolk County. Not the easiest place to build affordable housing, so we're really excited to see that. And then the other one is in Mount Vernon in Westchester, also not the easiest place to site affordable housing. So we're kind of excited to see that start to bubble through the rest of the state. We also last year made the funds available through our 9% round. And just to go back in history, the reason we really prioritized it for bond issues to start with was we thought we were putting a considerable amount of capital on the table through MRT. We wanted to see things move quickly. We can be a little bit more nimble in our bond financings. It's totally open window. If you're working on a project, you have a budget and a concept. It's very easy to come in and talk to us about that, and we can give you feedback and massage it back and forth in a much more open way than is possible in the 9% round, which tends to be, we also want you to come in and talk to us about those too, but it's very competitive. You put in your application. We don't have that same back and forth on the 9% round as we do in the 4. But as we saw this continuation of the MRT funding and an understanding that the need is everywhere around the state, we wanted to make the richer resource of the 9% available to marry with MRT funds. So in last year's unified funding round, we made up to the maximum amount of MRT funds available, and we made 6 awards of projects. So far, none of them have closed. They are, once again, scattered throughout New York with not the concentration, actually, that we had seen otherwise in bond deals. So we have a project in Portland, one in Steuben County, one in Rockland, one in Ulster, and then 3 in the downstate community. We also have 2 other transactions moving forward on the HFA side, one in Canandaigua and one in Buffalo. So I think I want to talk a bit about what some of the challenges are as we move away from New York 3 for our agency. We are many things to many people, but ultimately we're a housing finance agency. We're not a supportive housing provider or funder. And so as we funded every single one of these projects, it has really forged a very tight partnership between us and OMH and HHAP. There are regular conversations that go on, the staff of those 2 organizations and the staff at HCR, so that everybody is coordinating their work, because On the supportive side, we want to see what I'm going to call the O agencies, or, really take the lead in identifying who the service provider is, what the populations are. And as we move away from NYRC 3, the other challenge that we faced is we don't always have an easy way to check the box to make sure that the project that's being proposed is something that's going to qualify for MRT funds. And we have a responsibility to the Department of Health in spending what I totally consider to be their funds on our projects to be able to help them move the dial on the Medicaid savings. That's really what's driving this capital coming to the agency. It's what, we're not quite judged on it, but I do have I feel very strongly the responsibility that whatever we're going to do with that money needs to help DOH bring down their Medicaid bill. So we're also talking to them on a regular basis about whether a particular project that's proposed to us will really do that. Does this fit your model? If we don't have an O agency there, an OMH service award, for example, does what's being proposed to us work for us? So that also has started an ongoing dialogue between DOH, which was there, I think, more just about like how much capital are you going to give us, to be more thoughtful on our end about what do you really want to see and what are the types of housing providers that will really help you reach our goals. I was kicking this around with David Simmons yesterday, and one of the things we were brainstorming about was whether or not, as people came to us with particular proposals, we might have them fill out a questionnaire that would talk about the particular population that people wanted to serve. And it would be then a questionnaire we would share with DOH, and putting that decision-making where I think it's most appropriate in the people who really have the expertise to do that. We can look at budgets all day long. We know how numbers come together. We can brainstorm about how to move equity around in a project, but we really want to make sure that the people whose budgets we're impacting, are at the table helping to make the decision about the populations. Should I keep going?
You have a little time if you want to, but I'm sure people are eager to ask questions too.
I think the other thing that I want to say, just to follow up on the middle income, is that, and really it goes to what I said before about constantly looking at ways to innovate what we do at HCR. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I think maybe sometimes I have a really short attention span. So I'm always looking for new ways to do things or new ways to push the envelope about what we're doing. But I think that the continuous ability to partner with the market, to partner with for-profit developers, not-for-profit developers, lenders, tax credit, equity investors, et cetera, to be able to do that and to put projects throughout New York State in a way that's really meaningful has really helped us, tell the story about why more capital should come to our agency and the ways that we can help make communities around New York State better for all involved. So I totally approach our work with the philosophy that we're not successful unless we're encouraging everybody in this room to sort of reach for the next idea, reach for a better idea, reach for continuously more efficient ways of making housing happen, and making sure that we're doing it in a way that meets a wide variety of needs around the state. So I want to encourage everybody here to lean in as much as I encourage everybody on my staff to lean in and do that, and hopefully we can get more and more resources to help make more housing happen.
Great, thank you, Marian. Marian, I'm wondering, have you seen the effects of sort of as New York 3 is winding down? Do you think that you're starting to see the impact on your ability to get MRT out on the street and get deals closed?
I hear this so far more than I've seen it, but I know everybody's concerned about there not being enough service dollars that are out there to help take care of the units that need to be built in New York City. I think we still have a fairly robust pipeline, especially as we've opened it up across the state, but I do think sometime soon that's going to come home to roost.
I just wanted to say, I concur with Marian. I think that the issue of lack of subsidies and how we can, advocate for more of those at this particular time is really going to be the thing that either slows things down or breaks things up a little bit. And it disrupts really the momentum that we have now. I think it's a very serious issue.
Yeah, it's the service and operating. Where's next year's money?
I have a very hard question for Marian, but she said she'd take points off my next application, so I'm going to leave it to the audience to ask the hard questions. At your own risk.
Not true, not true.
No, but good point. Let's take questions from the audience. We have a couple minutes, so.
Well,
Come on, folks.
Seriously?
You got.
I guess we answered everybody.
What if you get bonus points for asking a question?
Okay.
I'm relatively new to the housing business, which is why I came for the innovative financing discussion. And I actually have a relationship with a developer who is interested in developing the buildings, but the challenge that I have had is finding the subsidies to support the people to occupy the units. And I know that you all do the financing, but I'm really interested. There are challenges in housing low-income folks. And so to create a mixed-use building of single adults, low-income single adults, and families with children or of varying incomes, I'm wondering what types of services do you offer in the supportive context in order to meet the different needs and ensure safety of the different types of residents in a mixed-use building?
I think that's
I'm sorry, Colonel, please. Go ahead.
Thanks. Well, of course, it depends. You're not asking about the subsidy source, but the actual services to provide? I just want to confirm.
I'm also asking about the subsidy source because it feels like the subsidy sources are really...
Right, so we've mostly been talking about the capital, just except with the very end, you just heard talk about the New York 3. So there is some good news in terms of DOH-MH just released an addendum, which probably most of you already know, but I just heard about it yesterday with both family and single units. It's not, I think it's maybe 100. That was the number that was thrown out. But so it's not, a solution to obviously the homelessness problem, but it is new units. I guess it's repurposed units from things that weren't moving forward. So I also heard that HASA is reopening some units that they have for application. In fact, they were encouraging us to apply. So, I think it's as it's been for the last 12 months, a lot of stuff repositioning and sort of the drips and drabs of New York 3, which is, but certainly no way to support the robust pipeline that Marian and HPD have going, but it is something. In terms of the actual services, I think that's we're probably not the right panel to answer that question, but I do think that, as Martin said, the security up front is a huge, even like on our Morris Avenue project, we actually had this debate because it's 30% of the population that's going to be supportive housing. So there was questions asked about, do we need 24-hour front desk in that kind of building? As Martin said, most of the, almost every other affordable housing, straight affordable, wouldn't have desk security. So what is the tipping point? And a lot of it has to do with, there's the funders, some of the funders really want the security, but then there's also the community board and the other residents and what people expect. So it's, when you start looking at these more integrated models, the questions do become more interesting. And we're on the other thing I didn't mention about our Morris Avenue project for our first time for SUS, we're doing youth, OMH youth population, which is young adults coming from either psychiatric institutions or failed foster care situations. And that is a different, OMH has been really telling us we really need to focus because that's a very different population. And in fact, there's enhancement for those units because of the special nature of that population. So it really has to be pretty individually tailored is I guess, the sort of most generic advice I would have, depending on what population and what households you're serving.
I would also add to that you need to just track New York State OMH, New York City DOHMH, New York City HRA House Serve program, and put those on your radar on a regular basis. I'm not sure what the service, how many service contracts you have now and where that will go in the future, but those are sort of the big three, and then their permutations. As Arlo just mentioned, you'll get a youth RFP out with the enhancement bonus, which is very helpful, particularly if you're expanding rent. The other thing is although it's becoming increasingly more difficult as time goes on, is to keep your eye on VASH certificates, because there's still veterans out there that could use additional housing, and as long as you don't put more than 8 of the VASH in one project, you don't trip up prevailing wages, and those are fairly enriched. Those are enriched certificates as well. So keep those on your sort of dashboard, and that will help you.
And for us, for the typical level of services in our building, so I think the one we're doing with SUS, there'll be 37 supportive units. I think there'll be about 4 social service staff, and then the 5 full-time equivalents for the front desk. We've kind of learned, we've done this a lot. There's kind of a tipping point for the front desk working. So projects that we've done that have smaller number of supportive units, let's say 15 units, we don't have front desk. But we think you need about 35 to 40 to make the front desk work. One of the challenges we've had when the percentages on these integrated models is we've started to see sometimes the service funding agency to say, why are we paying for all the front desk? In particular, we had a project where it was 40 New York 3 units, but that was only 26% of the units in the building. And they said, we only want to fund, our share of it. But the reality was there would be no front desk if there wasn't for those 40 New York, and you can't pay for part of it because no one's paying for the other. But part of our argument, and that I think makes sense, is that we had lowered those rents. We had taken a 60% AMI rent and lowered the rent in that case from, let's say, $850, which we would charge if it was a tax credit unit. We lowered it down to, I think, $600 or $650. So we could have charged the tax credit rent and funded part of the security. And in the future, that may be how we address this, saying, okay, if we're looking to pay part of the front desk, we charge you a tax credit rent. So now SUS, instead of paying us $725 and providing the front desk, they pay us $850 and we pay them back for half the front desk. Gets you to the same place, but it might help the agencies to feel like they're not paying it. Like they say, we don't want to pay for all the front desk, and the capital funders are like, but then you don't get a discounted rent. There's solutions to this stuff, but the conversations need to start early.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that what Martin was just saying is that having done now partnerships with 4 or 5 different for-profits, that is all a negotiation, and Martin has his preferred way of doing it, but the others have a different way, which is, as Martin was suggesting, they charge a little bit higher rent, but then they cover some of the security costs. So it may end up being the same. It would be interesting to actually study that issue, but...
And we've done it both ways, actually.
Actually, at Creston, we did put a line in for, we picked up part of the security for the community residents, because the residents feel it's very important to have, essentially I wouldn't call it doorman, but to have, to have the tenant at front, and this worked out.
Question. Uni. Hi.
Uni Cho, Northeast Brooklyn Housing Development Corporation. I don't know which one of you said that your project had a commercial component, but
Arlo.
Arlo. How did you already tenant that space with a commercial tenant? And if so, what strategy did you employ to get what kind of service provider, vendor to occupy that space?
Sure. So, and I know Martin has certainly done stuff with retail, and Marian, I'm sure, and Oliver could add to them, probably Robert as well. For this project, we did not have a tenant. So the way with an HDC financing is that they did agree to do the core and shell build out as part of the HDC first mortgage, include that. But in turn, it had to be guaranteed a certain rent by the developer in order to pay the debt service on that amount of the delta on that part of the mortgage. So in this case, the developer is taking the risk that in the term that we build the building, that they're going to find a tenant for at least that amount that and it's a fairly low, I mean, I don't want to, it's certainly not a steal for the developer, and SUS does not control those economics, that's all with Alembic, but it's, I think, a fair deal, and Mike could say what he thinks, but it's an interesting question, especially in places where we are in Brownsville, which right now, frankly, the retail is pretty limited. It's bodegas and some Salvation Armies and 99-cent stores. But, it's 10 minutes on the J train and you're in, $100 a square foot retail spaces. So is that retail corridor going to extend along past Williamsburg and Bushwick? A lot of people say yes, but at what point are you willing to put your balance sheet on the line to say that? So right now they're marketing the space. One thing, SUS is actually looking at leasing the space for our own offices, which is probably not a home run from an economic standpoint, but we're a creditworthy tenant and
Yeah, particularly in weaker retail markets, you really can't market the space ahead of time. It's only big national retailers that would ever pre-sign a lease. We actually find we're marketing like 26,000 square feet of space in East New York now in buildings in construction. You find that until the storefront's in and you actually have a space, it's very hard to even market it. And as Arlo was kind of alluding to, it's a long play on the retail because that $17.50 a foot is for just vanilla box space.
Correct.
So the retail leaseholder may then have to put in hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a tenant and really not see that money back for a long time. And we've done retail spaces where we might lose money for the first 3-5 years, but really the retail's a long play. And the funders want to know the rent's paid, so I think almost universally it's a guaranteed master lease. But for us, we think it's important. We're willing to lose money in the short term to get good tenants for what we want in the neighborhood. And as neighborhoods change, you'll get the money back in the long term.
The trends in Brooklyn right now, particularly on Flatbush and Church Avenue. I saw a recent sheet. The BID did an extensive survey of all the businesses in the area, and the rents the asking is between $38 and $80 a square foot. The only advice I'll tell you that's been given to you today is just that most underwriters won't accept more than 20% of your total cash flow that will come from retail commercial rents. So to just keep that in mind when you're looking at it. But I would say yes, the rents are trending. Yes, there's more need for storefronts. And my guess, Martin, you're going to probably see some nice numbers coming in at some point.
So Church Avenue is not East New York right now.
Not yet.
That's right.
Not yet.
That's right.
Hey, I'm not going to talk about commercial space, but in my remarks, I neglected to introduce David Simmons, who runs the MRT program for us. So if you have questions about MRT, David's up here in the front, 212-872-0481.
Don't call Marian.
212-872-0481.
Zero what?
481.
Great. Well, thank you to all the panelists. That is a terrific panel. Thank you.